somehow to Solny Market. It is called so because in particular places on market squares people were selling different goods, and in this square they were selling mainly salt. In the place where we met they were selling fish, etc., etc. So it is 1/3 of the area of main market square, and yes, with the end of 19th century merchants were no longer welcome on main market squares because they were, making too much trouble, noise, crowd, etc. So they were moved to so-called market halls, and so they do sell things here anymore, just flowers. So on Salt Market you can get flowers 24 hours a day, 7 days per week. So anytime you need flowers very quickly, if there is some emergency situation, you can come here. Yes. Wrocław, after Second World War, was totally destroyed. 70% of buildings were destroyed. So most of Polish cities were destroyed. That's why after war they had to rebuild many buildings very quickly. That's why you can see so many ugly buildings in Wrocław. But this is not a general rule, because for example western side of Solny Market was built in 60s. This is just some very, very general reconstruction of buildings that were here before Second World War. And can you take a look around and find the oldest building that you think is the oldest? Which one? This one? This one, yes.
Our son is member of the Wrocław Institute and he joined your group, I don't know, 3 weeks ago, so he told you about this sculpture.
Yeah, so this building is the oldest. The facade was built in 1929, from 1928 to 1929. But yes, this is the oldest. This one, on the other hand, was built in 1931. So those old, ugly, new ugly buildings are not the general rule. And honestly, I don't think they are ugly, those two, because this style is called modernism. So modernism is a style that was very popular in 20s and in Europe. So the principle of modernism was that form follows function. So they didn't use any ornaments and they didn't use symmetry. They were just composing, vertical and horizontal elements and building nice functional buildings. Yes, and anyway, I told you that yes, the facade is new, but inside there, this building is from 16th century, so it's 400 years old at least. The basement is from 15th century, so it's even older. Yes, and people in Middle Ages could not read. Usually, so they were naming the houses not with numbers. The numbers were introduced to Solny Market and to Main Market Square in 1750s. Up to 1750s, people were calling buildings just by names. So, for example, there is a Griffin House, there is a House of Golden Dog, there is a House of Crystal Jar, there is a House of Blue Sun, and this one has always been famous as House of the Black Man. And this is probably because of St. Mauritius. The cult of St. Mauritius was very popular in Wrocław, and St. Mauritius was black. You can also see his face in the coat of arms of Benedict XVI, the previous pope. So, the owners were usually placing some coats of arms on the facades, so people were seeing some objects in those coats of arms, so they were just calling the buildings by what they could see. So this one has always been famous as House of a Black Man, and there was a statue of a black man before the Second World War, and this one is a it's like very, very strange copy, but a very cool copy. It was placed there in 90s, and the model that was posing to make this statue, his name was Eugeniusz Stankiewicz, nicknamed Get, and Get was a professor on Academy of Fine Arts and very famous sculptor in Wrocław. So maybe that's not the sexiest body that you have seen in your life, but there is a very cool story behind it, because it is very, very exact, and once, just after this statue was placed there, some surgeon visited Wrocław. He looked at this statue and said that, hey, this guy has hernia, just look at the side of the belly, he has some bruise. And it was fact, he had hernia, he went to hospital, had a USG examination and surgery, and then he was fine. The diagnosis was made only thanks to this statue there. Yeah, so that's a cool story behind it. Now we will go to Jewish quarter and the so-called quarter of 4 religions. Yes, and of course, if you have any questions, just ask me. Don't be afraid.
Gnomes. How come there are gnomes everywhere?
I will be telling about it later, but they commemorate anti-communist organization called Orange Alternative.
Okay.
Oh.